What if the world's second-largest economy just stops, not slows, not stalls, but slams into a full-blown recession? Because right now, the signs are mounting. A crippling property crisis, massive youth unemployment, plummeting foreign investment, and to top it off, a resurging trade war with the United States. And when China enters economic crisis mode, it's not just China that bleeds. It's the entire global economy, especially those countries whose survival depends on it. Let's not forget, the US and China are in the middle of an escalating trade war. From semiconductors to green tech, tariffs to blacklists, the world's two largest economies are pulling apart, and the fallout is shaking the foundations of global trade. American firms are moving production out of China. Chinese industries are reeling from export bans, sanctions, and capital flight. In response, Beijing is tightening control, cutting interest rates, and hoping to avoid what they fear most: a recession that could derail decades of growth. But what happens if they fail? That's what we're uncovering today. 10 countries that will suffer massively if China enters a full-scale recession. Some countries are already shaking. Others won't know what hit them until it's too late. Let's begin the countdown. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe to stay updated on how financial shifts in one corner of the world are reshaping everything, even the countries that think they're safe. Number 10. Germany, the mighty export machine of Europe. With luxury cars, high-end machinery, and chemical exports, Germany has long been seen as recession-proof. But here's the twist. China is Germany's biggest trading partner. In 2023 alone, over 100 billion in goods flowed from Germany to China, mostly high-end vehicles and industrial equipment. Now picture this. China's economy hits the wall. Construction slows. Factory upgrades are delayed. Middle-class Chinese households stop buying premium cars. What happens next? BMW, Mercedes, Siemens all face declining orders. Manufacturing slows in Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, Saxony. Thousands of mid-sized German firms, or Mittelstand, feel the burn. The good news? Germany can lean on the EU, where internal trade is strong. The bad news? The pain will still be real, and it'll start in the factories. Number 9. Japan. Japan is one of the world's most technologically advanced economies, but its relationship with China is complex. While tensions remain politically icy, economically they're interlocked. Japan exports cars, electronics, robotics, and machine parts to China. And more quietly, it depends heavily on millions of Chinese tourists who spend billions in Japanese cities. Now imagine a recession in China. Fewer orders for Japanese electronics, fewer tourists on Tokyo's neon-lit streets, shrinking demand across sectors. Yes, Japan has deep ties with the US, India, Southeast Asia. But the short-term shock, immediate, sharp, unavoidable. For an economy that's already battling deflation and slow growth, this blow would sting deeply. Number 8. South Korea. South Korea is a high-tech titan. It supplies China with chips, OLED panels, memory storage, display screens, the digital building blocks of modern devices. When China slows down, the tech orders vanish fast. That means Samsung, SK Hynix, and LG face supply chain disruptions and billions in lost revenue. And here's the twist. South Korea isn't just a supplier, it's also part of the ecosystem. Chinese companies feed back components and materials that Korean tech firms need. So when China falters, South Korea doesn't just lose a customer, it loses a partner. Yes, Seoul can pivot toward US and Southeast Asian markets, but not without a bruising adjustment. Tech moves fast, but recession pain, that lingers. Number 7. South Africa. China's appetite for raw materials has fueled South Africa's mining boom for years. Gold, iron ore, manganese, platinum, all shipped north to support China's megacities and massive construction efforts. The logic was simple. China builds, South Africa digs. But what happens when that hunger disappears? In a Chinese recession, steel demand collapses, construction grinds to a halt, and factories scale back. That means less need for iron ore, less need for manganese, less need for anything pulled from deep beneath South Africa's soil. For the mining towns built around these exports, towns like Rustenburg and Kuruman, the impact would be immediate and brutal. Mines slow production, thousands of jobs hang in the balance, export revenues shrink. And let's not forget the human cost. South Africa's mining sector supports hundreds of thousands of families, directly and indirectly. A Chinese slowdown doesn't just affect GDP, it affects dinner tables. South Africa may not be as deeply tied to China as some others on this list, But for its mining-heavy economy, a Chinese recession hits where it hurts most: the Earth itself. If you're the kind of person who sees the bigger picture, who knows a trade war isn't just politics, it's power, pressure, and survival, then hit subscribe, because what's coming next changes everything. Number 6. Malaysia. And speaking of vulnerable sectors, let's head to Malaysia, a country that straddles trade, tourism, and Chinese investment like few others. China is more than just a neighbor. It's Malaysia's largest trading partner and a central pillar in its long-term economic vision. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, billions have flowed into Malaysian ports, railways, power plants, even ambitious smart cities built from the ground up. Add to that the millions of Chinese tourists who visit Malaysia each year, not just for the beaches or food, but as part of a growing middle class eager to travel. Their spending fills hotel lobbies, restaurants, malls, and night markets. But now, picture a China in recession. Suddenly, exports stall, construction projects freeze mid-build, flights are cancelled, tourist hotspots go quiet, and the financial current that once flowed so strongly dries up almost overnight. This isn't just a slow bleed, it's a financial landslide, pulling down businesses, cutting jobs, and rattling investor confidence across the country. Sure, Malaysia has a dynamic and diversified economy, but let's be honest, when you lose your top customer, your top investor, and your top tourist all in one synchronized hit, that's not something you bounce back from quickly. That's the kind of blow that shakes your economic foundation. And for Malaysia, the foundation is shaking already. Number 5. Indonesia. Just across the water from Malaysia lies another rising force: Indonesia. A nation rich in natural resources, youthful in population, and increasingly central to Southeast Asia's future. But here's the thing: Indonesia's rise isn't happening in a vacuum. It's tethered tightly so to China. China buys up Indonesia's coal, palm oil, nickel, bauxite, and copper in enormous volumes. These aren't just export items. They are lifelines for rural communities, mining provinces, and national revenue. And China hasn't just been a buyer, it's been a builder. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has poured billions into Indonesia's infrastructure. Rail lines across Java, hydroelectric dams in Sumatra, smelters in Sulawesi, industrial zones across Kalimantan. For years, this relationship has been branded as mutually beneficial. China gets the raw materials, Indonesia gets the development. But that's the illusion of momentum, isn't it? Because if China falls into recession, that engine sputters. Commodity prices plunge. China stops importing in bulk. Investment dries up. And projects that once symbolized Indonesia's leap into the future, they halt mid-construction. Concrete shells, idle machinery, and empty promises. That affects more than GDP. It disrupts thousands of local jobs, strains government budgets, and weakens investor confidence just when Indonesia needs it most. The country has ambitions, massive ones: a new capital city, a tech transformation, green energy independence. But a Chinese recession? That's like yanking the fuel line on a jet mid-takeoff. Indonesia might not crash, but it'll be forced to circle, stalled, grounded, waiting. Number 4. Vietnam. In the past decade, Vietnam has gone from a quiet industrial player to one of the world's fastest-growing manufacturing hubs. As multinational companies began shifting operations out of China, escaping rising labor costs, geopolitical tension, and mounting tariffs, Vietnam became the go-to alternative. The factories came fast, exports boomed. Millions of jobs were created in garments, electronics, furniture, and beyond. But there's a detail most headlines miss. Vietnam's rise was never truly independent. It's been built on deep integration with China, not as a rival but as a partner in production. Vietnamese factories depend on Chinese raw materials, electronics, and machinery. And once products are assembled, many are sold right back to China or pass through its distribution chains. It's a loop, a delicate one. And in the event of a Chinese recession, that loop doesn't bend, it snaps. First, inputs dry up. No more components, no more shipments. Then, orders vanish. Chinese buyers cancel contracts. Demand collapses across Asia and beyond. The result is a double shock: supply side and demand side, with almost no time to adapt. Imagine factory floors going silent, shipping containers left empty. Workers in provinces like Bac Ninh or Dong Nai laid off en masse. It's not just a slowdown. It's an industrial stutter, one that can send Vietnam's rapid growth into reverse. And even if Vietnam tries to pivot west, to Europe or the US, the transition takes time, trust, and infrastructure that can't be rebuilt overnight. In short, Vietnam's strength is also its weakness. The very supply chain that built its rise could unravel in a moment. Number 3. Russia. For decades, Russia positioned itself as an energy superpower, selling oil, gas, and raw materials to Europe and beyond. But everything changed in 2022. When war broke out in Ukraine, the West hit hard with sanctions. Banks were frozen, corporations fled, trade ties snapped, and Russia, out of necessity, turned to one country for relief: China. Beijing became Russia's lifeline. Today, China buys more Russian oil, coal, metals, and wheat than any other nation. It sends tech, machinery, and investment in return. On paper, it looks like a new alliance. But look closer, and it starts to feel more like dependency. Because if China enters recession, that lifeline begins to fray. Energy demand falls. China cuts imports, global commodity prices drop, and Russia earns less per barrel, less per ton, less per deal. And it's not just the numbers. China may delay payments, cancel infrastructure plans. Projects that were already fragile grind to a halt. And here's the real danger. Russia has no plan B. Europe is closed. The US is hostile. India and smaller buyers can't absorb the same volumes. So when China pulls back, even slightly, Russia faces a sudden vacuum. GDP contracts, the ruble slips. Domestic industries feel the freeze. And politically, the pressure mounts fast. Because it's not just the war that's bleeding the economy anymore. It's the loss of the one partner Russia thought it could rely on. This isn't just about oil. It's about the collapse of Russia's last remaining economic escape route. Number 2. Brazil. Picture this. Open fields of soybeans stretching across the Brazilian heartland. Dusty iron ore trucks climbing the red hills of Minas Gerais. Livestock farms feeding a global demand. Oil platforms dotting the Atlantic coast. All of it harvested, mined, produced, and shipped to one primary buyer: China. Over 30% of Brazil's total exports go to China. Not just a customer, but the customer. And what does China buy? Soybeans to feed its pigs, iron ore to build its cities, meat and poultry for its massive population, oil and gas to fuel its factories and fleets. When China is growing, Brazil thrives. Commodity prices surge. Farmers expand production. Mining companies open new sites. Rural towns boom. But when China slows, the entire system starts to shake. Soybean prices crash. Iron shipments get cut. Demand for Brazilian meat drops. Oil revenues shrink. And with that, Brazil's rural economy, already fragile, begins to fracture. Small farmers feel it first, then transport companies, then the national budget. Mining towns go quiet. Agricultural regions, especially in Mato Grosso, Pará, and Goiás, feel the downturn like a drought. Brazil has tried to diversify. It trades with Europe, with the US, with Latin America. But let's be honest, no other partner matches China's volume, speed, or hunger. And without that hunger, Brazil loses its breath. Now layer in political uncertainty, high inflation, and a historically volatile currency. And you're not looking at a mild slowdown. You're staring down the barrel of a perfect economic storm. Number 1. Australia. Out of every nation on this list, big or small, rich or developing, no country is more economically exposed to China than Australia. Not even those geographically closer. Not even those inside China's direct sphere of influence. And here's why. Over 35% of Australia's total exports go directly to China. That's more than 1/3 of its entire trade output, flowing into the hands of one single nation. That's not just a partnership, that's dependence. And at the center of it all, iron ore. Australia is the world's largest iron ore exporter, and China by far is the biggest buyer. That ore feeds China's construction industry, its infrastructure mega projects, and the very steel that built its skyline. So what happens when China enters recession? Construction halts, projects are cancelled, steel demand collapses. And just like that, Australia's mining towns fall quiet. The mines of Pilbara and Port Hedland slow production. Shipping routes are reduced. Billions in revenue vanish. But the shock doesn't stop in the dirt. It hits. The workers who lose their jobs, the ports that see fewer vessels, the dollar which slips under global pressure, and the national budget which relies heavily on mining tax revenue. And while mining is the giant, it's not the only vulnerable pillar. Education and tourism, two other sectors propped up by Chinese spending, also take a direct hit. Chinese students contribute billions to Australian universities. Chinese tourists flood into Sydney, Melbourne, the Gold Coast year-round. But a recession in China? Flights dry up. Visa applications decline. Tuition payments disappear. The result? An economy exposed on three fronts: minerals, education, and tourism, all tied tightly to a single partner. And just to raise the stakes even more, geopolitical tensions between Canberra and Beijing have been rising for years. Over trade bans, cybersecurity, military alignments. That means if Australia faces economic pain, it may not get the same recovery grace that others could. No bailout deals, no stimulus packages, no handshake diplomacy, just cold, hard silence. This isn't just vulnerability, it's ground zero. Australia isn't only the most exposed country on this list. It may be the one that suffers the deepest, longest-lasting economic wound when China finally hits the wall. So, what have we learned? When the Chinese economy slows down, it's not just a domestic issue, it sends shockwaves across the globe, impacting nations that once rode the wave of China's growth. Countries with diversified economies might adapt, but others, those whose lifelines run straight into Chinese ports, will find themselves gasping for air. We are witnessing the early cracks of global overdependence. Supply chains stretched too far, export strategies built on a single buyer, growth models tied to one engine. And now the question becomes, if one domino falls, how many more are already leaning? What do you think? Have we built a global economy that's too connected for comfort? And if China's engine finally fails, how many countries will be left standing on their own?